Man's love-hate relationship with alcohol dates back to the beginning of time. For centuries, we've raised glasses to ignite celebrations and downed bottles to drown sorrows. But no matter what the occasion or the reason, drinking alcohol seems to make many of us just feel better. However, excessive amounts of alcohol can and do affect us, both physically and mentally, in some cases with extreme results. We can find ourselves brimming with confidence, soaring with eagles, and conquering worlds. Apparently, there's nothing we can't do. Unless, of course, we're asked to stand on one leg or touch our nose. Because to an intoxicated body, these simple actions can be the most difficult contortions imaginable. But as we all know, the negative effects of alcohol go way beyond a lack of coordination. The consequences of alcohol abuse are an ever-growing list, ranging from a pounding headache the next morning to serious long-term illnesses, and more often than we care to admit, even death. So with all of these known negative consequences, how does someone become an alcoholic, and why do they continue to drink? Is it due to a flaw in character, a miserable childhood, or does it simply start as a bad day at the office? As we're about to see, for many alcoholics, the answers to some of these questions can have less to do with the explanations they give for their drinking and more to do with their genetic makeup. As early as the 1930s, scientists began to think of alcoholism as a medical disorder. Some even went so far as to call it a disease. Like other medical problems traditionally called diseases, they recognized that alcoholism had a unique set of symptoms and a clear progression. By thinking of alcoholism as a disease, people began to consider it as a health problem, not just a moral weakness. However, diseases have biological causes, and scientists didn't know enough about the biological causes of alcoholism to convince many skeptics that it really did have a biological basis. And doctors certainly didn't know enough about alcoholism's biological causes to have much of an effect on its treatment. So despite being a disease, alcoholism continued to be treated using mostly psychological and moral approaches. In the meantime, however, scientists continued their search. In the last 2 decades, researchers have found that our genetic makeup influences our likelihood of developing a wide range of medical problems. Although having a genetic predisposition is a very important factor, our real chances of developing many diseases are influenced not only by our genes alone, but also by many environmental factors, such as our eating and drinking habits, where we live, and what we do for a living. This holds true not only for medical problems like cancer and heart disease, but also for alcoholism. But although many diseases arise from interactions between our bodies and the world around us, it doesn't necessarily mean that all people in the same situation will develop the same disease. So if the circumstances are indeed the same, why do some people develop a disease while others don't? For many people, much of the answer lies deep within our bodies, submerged at the microscopic depths of our cells, with our genes. Although they can't talk, laboratory animals have in fact told us a great deal about the genetic connection with diseases. By studying these animals and their genetic makeup, scientists have found that genes help to determine whether certain animals will develop diseases such as cancer or heart disease, while others won't. With humans, many years of research have shown clearly that diseases like cancer and heart disease run in families, often through genetic predisposition. So while our families give us many things, thanks to genes, they sometimes give us far more than we bargained for. We know that alcoholism, like heart disease and cancer, also runs in families. So that brings us to a very important question. Does alcoholism have a genetic basis like many other diseases? To answer this question, we need the help of some familiar faces. In fact, these faces are a little more than just familiar, they're identical. That's because they belong to what are called monozygotic, or identical twins. Besides being physically identical, these twins are also genetically identical. Twin studies have shown that there is clearly a genetic common denominator for alcohol and drug abuse that runs in families. We know that in the general population, there is about a 1 in 10 chance that a man and about a 1 in 20 chance that a woman will develop a drinking problem at some point in their life. However, researchers have found that if one of a pair of male identical twins abuses alcohol, the odds rise greatly from 1 in 10 to over 7 in 10 that the other twin will also abuse alcohol. Similarly, if one of a pair of female identical twins abuses alcohol, the odds rise from about 1 in 20 to about 7 in 20, or about a third, that the other will do the same. Even if the twins were separated at birth and raised by different families in different countries, the results are still the same. For those of us who are not identical twins, the likelihood of our developing alcoholism is similarly highly influenced by the people we are most genetically similar to, namely the members of our immediate family. If one of our close relatives, such as a parent, brother, or sister, has a drinking problem, then the odds are significantly increased that we will develop a similar problem. The technical term for families with a history of alcoholism is family history positive. Families without a history of alcoholism are termed family history negative. So strong is the impact of our immediate family that having a family history positive is the #1 predictor of whether we will develop alcoholism. A man with one alcoholic parent has a 1 in 3 chance of also becoming an alcoholic. If a man has 2 alcoholic parents, his odds of developing a drinking problem are nearly 1 in 2, almost 50%. Similarly, a woman with one alcoholic parent has a 1 in 10 chance of becoming an alcoholic. If a woman has 2 alcoholic parents, her odds of developing a drinking problem increase to 1 in 3. These numbers clearly show that while genes provide a strong biological basis for the development of alcoholism, genes alone are not always enough. We also know that some people who have no clear genetic predisposition can develop alcoholism. Other factors, such as personal history and stress, also play an important role. However, unlike genetic predisposition, these other factors have been well recognized for years and have been thoroughly discussed elsewhere. It is the purpose of this video series to discuss primarily the biological factors that contribute to the development of alcoholism. Once the results of family studies showed scientists the importance of genes in determining whether or not someone develops alcoholism, they began to investigate the biological causes of alcoholism in other ways. Scientists have found that alcohol consumption is not a uniquely human behavior. Animals will voluntarily take alcohol and drugs, just like people do. Many animals will easily learn to perform a task, such as pressing a lever, in order to receive the very same drugs that people abuse. But why would animals want to work to receive alcohol and other drugs? Many human alcoholics give a wide range of reasons for why they drink. Peer pressure, boredom, lack of opportunity, stress, an unhappy marriage, an abusive childhood, loss of a loved one, or even a bad day at the office. Although all of these might be reasons why humans drink, it's hard to imagine that these same issues would influence a monkey or a mouse to press a lever for a drink of alcohol. Although we can't look inside an animal's head to see why it will work to get alcohol, in many ways its behavior seems to speak for itself. It appears that other animals, just like humans, won't keep doing something that they don't, shall we say, enjoy. But once an animal has learned that behaving in a certain way, such as pressing a lever, will get them a drink of alcohol, many of them will not only repeat that behavior, they will do it as often as possible. When something makes a behavior more likely to be repeated, that something, in this case alcohol, is called a reinforcer. Many scientists now believe that regardless of what other reason people might have for drinking, one of the most important reasons is because in some way alcohol makes them feel good or is rewarding to them. When people drink because it is rewarding, alcohol is called a positive reinforcer. Now, it is an interesting part of human and animal behavior that in addition to working for pleasurable things, animals, like people, will also work to avoid unpleasant things. These things that animals and people will work to avoid are called negative reinforcers. For instance, animals will quickly learn to press a lever to avoid getting shocked. In this example, the shock is a negative reinforcer. Although people also like to avoid physically painful events like shocks, they more frequently have to work to avoid feeling uncomfortable emotions or re-experiencing unhappy memories. When people drink alcohol to avoid feeling bad, it's just like pressing a lever to avoid getting shocked. Taken together, these concepts of positive and negative reinforcers are called the reinforcement model of addiction. Alcohol is a very strong reinforcer. Because of this, many scientists believe that alcohol makes people experience a loss of control, which makes them much more likely to repeat the same behaviors over and over, in this case, continually drinking in spite of the consequences. We've learned that some animals and some humans will work hard to receive alcohol, and we know they do this because it makes them feel good. That is, they find the experience reinforcing. But why? Well, this is one situation where the answer is definitely all in your head. Whether it's a mouse, monkey, or human, all mammals have very important brain structures organized into a system we call the reward pathways. The reward pathways control all of our pleasurable experiences from eating to sex. All drugs of abuse, including alcohol, trigger powerful reactions in the reward pathways. One of the most important parts of the reward pathways is the Nucleus Accumbens. The Nucleus Accumbens is a very small part of the brain. Although it is only about the size of an apple seed, its impact is enormous. The nerve cells in the Nucleus Accumbens are ultimately responsible for all of the feelings of pleasure we get from drinking alcohol. Because of this, the Nucleus Accumbens is called the brain's pleasure center. The normal communication processes in the brain use small electrical currents to carry messages. Scientists have found that they can artificially stimulate the Nucleus Accumbens by using a tiny electrode carrying a small electrical current. Stimulating this area of the brain feels so good to an animal that it will work to the point of exhaustion and sometimes even death to get this stimulation. Studies like these provide dramatic evidence for the reward model of addiction by proving that we will repeat behaviors regardless of their consequences because they make us feel good. This understanding of the reward pathways has, in turn, led us to a better understanding of alcoholics and their motivations to drink. In the past, doctors thought that only individuals who were physically dependent upon alcohol were alcoholics. In other words, alcoholics were only those people who could not function without alcohol in their bodies. It was thought that alcoholics drank to avoid uncomfortable and frightening withdrawal symptoms such as tremors, seizures, and hallucinations. This was the thinking behind what was called the dependence theory of alcoholism. However, the dependence theory was unable to explain why anyone would drink enough in the first place to become physically dependent. We need to look at both the positive and negative reinforcing properties of alcohol to explain why people would both start drinking and then continue drinking. By tying the development of alcoholism to alcohol's ability to make us feel better, the reinforcement model is able to provide a fuller explanation for our drinking behavior than the dependence model. It also provides an explanation that matches what we know about how brain areas such as the reward pathways work. It's funny how things change. We used to think that only people who were so physically dependent upon alcohol that they drank to avoid feeling bad were alcoholics. We now recognize that drinking to feel better also plays a major role in the development of alcoholism. Today, we understand that physical dependence is only one of the symptoms of alcoholism. Many alcoholism specialists now accept that a pattern of continued drinking in spite of repeated harmful consequences is the clearest indicator that a person has an alcohol abuse problem. Many people wonder why we would want to compare the results from well-controlled lab tests of animals drinking alcohol to the drinking behaviors of humans. After all, animals don't brew their own alcohol, and pressing levers for drinks isn't exactly natural. Clearly, it would be easier to believe that the drinking behavior of animals should be compared to that of humans if it could be shown that animals in their natural settings seek out alcohol in ways similar to humans.
Obviously, animals can't go to a bar to get a drink, but by letting nature take its course, they have been known to find their alcohol in other ways. In the Caribbean, scientists who were studying the local monkeys noticed that some, but not all of the monkeys, appeared to be drunk much of the time. But where would these drunken monkeys get alcohol, and why weren't they all drunk? The monkeys were getting their alcohol from fruit that had fallen from the trees. As the hot Caribbean sun began to rot some of the fruit, the sugars in the fruit would ferment. This fermentation produced alcohol. The scientists noticed that the monkeys would sample a small piece of each fruit before eating more of it. Some of the monkeys disliked the fermented fruit and ate only fresh fruit. But other monkeys didn't like the fresh fruit and would throw it away. These monkeys weren't just looking for fruit to eat. They were looking for the fermented fruit to get drunk.
This was a very fascinating discovery, but it's still a bit hard to believe that these monkeys were getting drunk for the same reasons given by some of their human counterparts. While it is possible that a monkey who has had a bad day in the jungle might feel the need to come home and crack open a piece of fermented fruit, a much more likely explanation is that these monkeys had a genetic predisposition towards liking alcohol.
Further studies have proven this genetic connection, revealing that the monkeys who preferred fresh fruit came from the same families, while those who preferred the fermented fruit came from a different set of families. So these studies also demonstrated that for monkeys, just like people, alcohol dependence tends to run in families and has a strong genetic link. Although studying monkey and human families with a positive history for alcoholism can help us better understand the genetic basis for alcoholism, this does have limitations that can only be overcome using laboratory studies. Working with lab mice, scientists have been able to carefully control breeding to clearly demonstrate the importance of genetics in the development of alcoholism and drug abuse. These mice have been specially bred to easily drink large amounts of alcohol. These animals are called alcohol-preferring. Similarly, other animals have been bred not to drink alcohol. These animals are called alcohol non-preferring. Alcohol-preferring strains of mice and rats will work hard to obtain a drink of alcohol, while alcohol non-preferring strains will not. Alcohol-preferring animals will also work hard to get other drugs of abuse, while alcohol non-preferring animals will not. Because these animals grow up under identical conditions, we know that these differences in drinking preferences are due to differences in the animal's genes. It is these gene differences that cause brains to respond differently to alcohol. This forms another important part of the biological basis for the disease of alcoholism. To truly understand the complexity of the human brain, let's descend to the microscopic level. One of the reasons why brains respond differently to alcohol is because they have different brain chemistries. These different brain chemistries are caused by genes that control chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. Used by the brain's nerve cells to communicate with one another, neurotransmitters induce or inhibit the brain's electrical signals.
Research shows that alcoholics have different levels of neurotransmitters in important brain areas, such as the reward pathways, compared with non-alcoholics. These differences in neurotransmitter levels help explain why alcoholics report greater feelings of pleasure from drinking than non-alcoholics. But what causes these differences in brain chemistries? Is it genetics, or is it the alcohol?
Because alcohol can actually change our brain chemistry, scientists weren't always sure if the differences between alcoholics and non-alcoholics were caused by genetics or by excessive drinking. They searched for the answer by studying the children of alcoholics who had not yet become problem drinkers and compared them to the children of non-alcoholics. Scientists knew that any differences in their biological responses to alcohol would be the result of genetics, not a history of excessive drinking. The studies reveal a number of differences between the children of alcoholics and the children of non-alcoholics in how they respond to alcohol. Sons of alcoholics report greater feelings of pleasure from alcohol than sons of non-alcoholics. However, sons of alcoholics seem to be less sensitive to other effects of alcohol, such as becoming moody or passing out. These differences may help explain why children of alcoholics are at much greater risk for developing alcoholism than children of non-alcoholics. Being more sensitive to the positive effects of alcohol and less sensitive to its negative effects may encourage them to drink more than people with normal sensitivity to alcohol. Other evidence for the biological basis of alcoholism comes from research comparing the brainwave patterns of alcoholics and their children with the brainwaves of non-alcoholics and their children. Recent studies have identified several genes that appear to be associated with differences in brainwaves between alcoholics and non-alcoholics, as well as between their children. Given all of the evidence that alcoholism has a genetic basis, many people ask if there are genes specific to alcoholism. Considering that humans have many thousands of genes, it is highly unlikely that there are specific genes whose only job is to determine whether someone will become an alcoholic. It would probably take a couple of dozen genes to influence the development of alcoholism. No one gene would be enough. However, combinations of these genes could influence important biological functions, such as the amount of neurotransmitters in the pleasure center of the brain, which could make it more or less likely that a person will become an alcoholic.
So what have we learned? We know that family history studies, along with studies of animals both in the wild and in laboratories, support the idea that alcoholism is strongly influenced by genes. These studies have led to the development of the reward model of addiction. We also know that there are important biological differences in the brain chemistry of alcoholics versus non-alcoholics, particularly within the reward pathways. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, we've learned that although being family history positive does not guarantee that someone will become an alcoholic, research clearly shows that these persons are at much greater risk to develop alcoholism than someone who is family history negative. For someone who is family history positive, their development of alcoholism may have as much to do with their genes as with the personal and social pressures that they feel.